Johan, when you're ready, you can start.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our monthly CAISA community conversation. Today, it's all about preparing for meetings, as Anne mentioned. I'd just like to remind you of the upcoming events. On the 10th of August will be our next monthly community conversation, and we will be celebrating Women's Month. So that day, the panel will consist of females, and we will talk about their experience in community associations, and we will also invite from our overseas colleagues to join us on that specific day. And then the big one for the year not to be missed is on the 18th of August at Steyn City. It's the M380 preparing for litigation. It's going to be an in-person meeting at Steyn City, and a reminder that this is not just for CAISA members, but for directors, for owners, for managers, for those guys who deal with the lawyers and litigation on a daily basis. We will make an announcement shortly for the continued education points for those guys who require that. And remember to follow us on Facebook, because that's where you find the latest and the most relevant news. Over to Kita.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for attending our community conversation today. We obviously want to give you some insight, advice, and tips to help you in planning your community's general meetings. So we're going to kick off. Oh, please post any questions in the comments box, as Anne said. So we will, throughout the meeting, be checking that. If you've got any questions, for example, on a sectional title that you may need some guidance on, feel free to ask your questions. So I'm going to kick off with Liesl today with our first question. And I want to ask Liesl to kind of give us a little bit of an indication or guidance as to the planning of an AGM, general meeting, SGM. And how far in advance should people start looking at planning and starting with the plans for these types of meetings?
Hi, everybody. I'm Liesl. Okay, so we actually have been very fortunate. We've just had our AGM. We had it on Monday, so I'm very familiar with this at this stage. So we start processing and getting things organized at least 4 months in advance. And our trustees were very sort of forward in presenting information sessions before time as well. So round about the middle of February, beginning to middle of February, they set up information sessions for different sections for all portfolios, and that we invited all the property owners. And so we got a lot of the stuff out of the way that sort of clutter up AGMs. So questions were asked, trustees answered, and that was very, very, very informational, and it does help a lot when it comes to AGMs. Okay, so in February, we did all of those, and then we also, our new budget kicks in from the beginning of March. So we have to make sure all of that's organized as well. So budgets are sorted, approved, and put forward at that time as well. So when it comes to actually setting up with the AGM and getting all the financials and budgeting into that whole AGM pack, it's already ready to go. So I'd say at the beginning, during March, we make sure that all the items on the previous minutes have been attended to, updates have been sent, and we would just make sure that that is all in order, so make sure that that's fine. Then we supply, as the management office and admin office, we supply the trustees with all the information that they're required to put into their reports, because they have to, all the different portfolios have to submit a report to the chairman to add into his chairman's report. So we get all of that out of the way, and that's basically all sorted and done by the end of May. So that's now February, March, April, 4th. Pretty much right there where we need to start getting the AGM pack out to our property owners. So our AGM is held at the end of June. So beginning of June, 1st of June, out goes our AGM pack. Everything is ready, set, and off it goes. And it goes through to all of our property owners. We also make it very clear to property owners that if they have any questions for the AGM, they have to submit it to us beforehand so that the trustees are prepared, and they, just to make sure that everything is in place over there. All right. Then from there, we ask, so our last 3 AGMs have been virtual because of COVID. It's all been virtual. So we get our property owners to register. It also gives you an indication of how many people are most likely to attend. 2 weeks before the AGM meeting, we sort out presentations and finalize the presentation. And then we sort of send out the registration. Once you've registered, we send out the link to the property owners, get themselves set up. Some of them are a little bit technologically disabled. We help them, and we just make sure that everything is in place for them. Okay. On the about a week before the time, we run through the actual whole process. So we work in conjunction with our managing agent. They do a lot of the work as well. And then we actually have almost like a dummy presentation. So the managing agent comes, management from the office sit together, and we actually run through the whole process, make sure we get some people to link in from the office, so we can make sure everything is in place and we're not going to have any glitches on the actual night. We also, on the day, we have a technician on speed dial, so that we do happen, you don't want to panic that day because there's all over the show. You want to just make sure that you are ready for it. So technician on speed dial for any of those last minute panics. We also try and have a few office helpers, 2 or 3, just so that, admitting people into meetings and things goes easily, making sure that those that are the proxies and the registered property owners, and because we have property owners that have multiple properties as well. So we've got to make sure that it's all in place. So that basically sort of runs with everything, and it's just all about preparation beforehand. But you've got to give yourself at least 4 months to get all of that into place, I would say.
Thanks, Liesl. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of work to get through. Anyway, moving on to the notice periods around that point. AJ, if you can give us some feedback on the timelines that normally get dictated by the MRI, Articles of Association, Incorporation, and their like. What is the normal timeline that we've got for a notice period to give to the members of the AGM? Because obviously there's different terminology. For example, our MRI refers to 21 clear days, but I think other people's may even refer to calendar days and so on. Can you maybe give us some insight on that?
Thanks, Gita. We often hear of alterable provisions and unalterable provisions in the Companies Act. Luckily, the time period is one of those alterable provisions. The Act dictates 14 business days for an AGM and 21 for an SGM business days. But it's an alterable provision, so your MRI can dictate a shorter or a longer period, depending on what suits your requirements. One should also, Gita, be very cautious of the wording used in the MRI. Sometimes it's clear days, so that's from sunset to sunrise, or sunrise to sunset. And sometimes it's business days. And then also most MRIs exclude the day the notice is transmitted and include the day of the meeting. So rather buy yourself time, rather have a longer period to convene the meeting than a shorter period and be faced with that challenge when the meeting commences by some clever legal eagle arriving.
Great, thanks for that advice, AJ. And I think that speaks back to what Liesel's saying. We need to prep at least 4 months in advance to at least make sure that we make that notice period, rather too early than too late. All right. I'd like to give it over to Sanet for now, just to give us some insight as to, the arrangements that need to be set into place with service providers like the accountants, the secretarial services, legal advisors, and any other service providers that you may have at your meeting on the day. Sanet, can you maybe give us some insight?
Oh, thank you, Gita. Sorry, we've got a problem with my camera. Yeah, so once the meeting has been set up and the date, you must see if you are going to be and it's been distributed, the notification. You'll have to see whether or not the relevant service providers, like if it's an SGM or an AGM, you always will need maybe some legal advice. There might be some legal or some, how can I say, something might occur that will need legal assistance at the meeting. And then also for your service providers like your accountants, when there's questions on budgets, on expenditure and stuff like that. That is what I would say will be the most two important service providers to be attending these meetings.
Great, thank you so much for that. I just want to add to what Samet's saying. For example, on your architectural guidelines, it's always good to have the knowledgeable people who are part of the committees. You may have a service provider like an external estate architect. Any questions that people may ask that are of that higher level that an architect could easily answer, it's always good to have that service provider nearby to answer any of those challenging questions that you may be stuck on the day of the question. Okay, thank you so much, Samet. Okay, great. The next question, we'd like to obviously touch on online versus person meetings. So I'd like to give Liesel and AJ the opportunity. Karen Barnard has also had experience in online meetings. My question to you is, how many of you have actually had online or in-person meetings, or maybe just online meetings? Liesel, you mentioned that the past 3 that you guys have done have all been online. So I'm going to start off with you, and then I'm going to give over to Karen and then come back to AJ. I just want to get an idea. So those people who haven't had online meetings yet, get a little bit of advice. Maybe you've got some tips on what to do, not to do, and possibly platforms that were used for these meetings. Liesel?
Okay. All right. So we didn't use any sort of outsourced agency or service provider. We actually just used Teams. And like I said, it's all about preparation and how technically you are inclined, I suppose. So the managing agent and myself, we worked together. Like I said, we used Teams. The last 3 AGMs have been held via Teams meetings. And this last AGM we had to get about 115 people, which we did get quite easily, which was quite nice. But you have to prep in advance. So when you send out that you're going to have a virtual meeting, you're going to get those people that need help. So our office has always made it very clear, we are here to help you. If you need some technical help, phone us. We will either get you to come to the office or we'll come to you and help you set up so that you are you don't have any problems on the day. I must admit, the first meeting we had was almost a disaster because nobody actually, it was right at the beginning of COVID, so nobody really had the virtual experience at that stage. So as the year, so we got through that one, great. Then the second year was a little bit better because everybody had been using virtual meetings because of COVID. And this last meeting was an absolute dream. But I also think we were a lot more prepared. Like I said, we made sure that we ran through the whole meeting beforehand. The presentation ran smoothly. We got people just logging in to making sure that we didn't have any glitches with people pressing our registration link and that sort of stuff. So yeah, that went very well. I have heard about the various service providers that can offer you, like Luma, I think you said, but we just felt that we were quite comfortable running, and because we have those information sessions, we don't get many questions on the night of the AGM because all the questions have been asked, and in those information sessions we have the architect or the building control inspector or those sort of people. So we try and just stick to the finances at the AGM, basically.
Okay, thank you so much. Karen, I'd like to ask from your perspective what your experience has been. I think because you're specifically one of the service providers that assists a lot of communities with their planning and their meetings and registration, what has your experience been with, for example, members coming in, registering of members? How do you manage the voting How does all of that get run on an online platform?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so basically on the platform, it was a bit of a challenging one for us. That's why with all the bigger estates, we actually postponed the meetings to have it at a later stage, communicated to the members, because we were just afraid with all the requirements on voting and specifically members in good standing, count voting and things like that, and obviously the contents of the agenda, specifically if you need to make changes to MOIs or rules or something like that, you know, we might have had a bit of a problem with the counting. But obviously we did it for the smaller corporates and the smaller estates, also via Teams, the same as what Liesl did. The platform is more than compatible to do that. And obviously you can do recordings on you know, while you've got the meeting on Teams, so that also assists with it. But with the bigger estates, we've actually decided, and the board of directors and trustees actually at that point of time just decided that they would rather push out the meeting so that we can have it in person. Yeah, so we also obviously investigated at that point of time, but luckily COVID regulations kept on changing where we could have the meetings rather in person. So we did investigate obviously a few platforms that can make provision for voting, counting, allowing people only in good standing to vote and things like that. But yeah, that's my experience. Obviously, yeah, technical wise, the beginning was a bit of a challenge, but on the second and third meetings, you were better prepared and trained by that time. It was something new to all of us.
Right, thanks, Karen. AJ, I just want to get from your opinion on online meetings. When obviously COVID put us all in a bit of a position that didn't give us much chance to plan for. So, you know, people had AGMs that were nearing sooner than later, which gave them less time to plan. How, in your experience, were these estates able to work around their MOI requirements, first of all? Was it legal to do online meetings? Obviously, that's changing now, and it's becoming a convenience because we can choose possibly to do it either online or in person or even hybrid, which is both. But from your experience, is this something that is acceptable, first of all? Do people need to amend their MOI to allow for an online meeting? And yeah, I think those are the two questions I'd like you to just answer for us now.
Thanks, Gita. The Companies Act accommodates virtual meetings, and then it's got this stinger, unless prohibited by the MOI of a company. So if the MOI of an association avoids a virtual meeting, well, then you can't hold it. If it is allowed, the Companies Act provides for two scenarios: entirely by virtual, or allowing certain members to participate in the meeting. The challenge is, according to me and the experience, the number of participants may create quite a blockage on the bandwidth, and that results in the challenge that the Companies Act imposes upon virtual meetings, that members need to participate concurrently and be able to hear and exercise their votes and their say without the need of an intermediary. Now, some arguments have been produced that somebody like Lumi is an intermediary, which is not entirely correct. So if one has got a small estate, I think virtual meeting is the way to go. But at some of the bigger estates, we had, via the virtual vote counting, at some stage 500 to 95 million votes in favor of a resolution, which was just totally wrong. So it resulted in a bit of a circus, and it forced an adjournment on the meeting to do that housekeeping. Gita, and lastly, an argument has also evolved that those members attending in person are at an advantage to those participating virtually, because they can hear the argument directly, make notes, and before the virtual people can react on it, the next question is on the table. So also keep in mind that if they are partially person participating and partially virtual, that one accommodates the virtual people because they're not as direct as the people in person.
Okay, great. Thank you, AJ. I don't know if I need to just check in with Anay quickly. Are there any questions we need to address while we're busy? No. All right. We'll keep continuing. We'll carry on. All right. I'd like to touch on the requirements for the agenda of general meetings, SGMs, AGMs, and so on. Karen, I'm going to ask you, because you are very familiar with most estates and the requirements of what needs to be presented at the AGM and obviously listed in the notice of the agenda. For example, where I work at the Coves, it's stipulated in our MRI what needs to be presented. But if you can just give us some feedback, are most estates aligned, or do they differ quite drastically between the requirements?
Okay, yeah, they do differ drastically from estate to estate. Obviously, they've got all the minimum requirements in terms of the Companies Act that says that every year you need to appoint your auditors, you need to approve your financial statements, you need to elect your directors. So those things are standard. Those three things are pretty much standard, and that needs to happen at the AGM. In some of the estates, MOI or constitution, depending on what your governing document stipulates other agenda points that needs to be attended to at an AGM. But most of the estates do not stipulate it in detail what the agenda should contain and what the agenda points should be. So obviously you need to, firstly, the most important thing is to establish through the directors, what would they like to address at the meeting? Ultimately, the notice is circulated under the board of directors, so they need to be in agreement with what needs to be addressed at the meeting. What's the agenda points? Would they like to add certain changes to the MRI, proposed changes to the MRI? Would they like to give feedback on certain items? The most important thing is also just to go back in terms of your MRIs and your other governing documents, like your rules and maybe your code of conduct or whatever the case might be, to make clear distinction in what needs to be approved by members, what needs to be rectified, and what needs to be presented. Because people are tending to make a mistake to ask for approval where your MRI clearly stipulates that it is the board of directors that's approving a certain item on your agenda point. Then you mustn't put it on an agenda that the members need to approve it. It might just have to be presented or rectified at the AGM. So it's a very important thing, because that also have an impact on your voting, what you physically need to vote on, what needs to be included in your proxy form that members need to be voted on. So that's a very important thing that all estates must look at, because it can create a lot of problems going forward. If you don't have that agenda point set out very clearly. Obviously, that's basically, it differs. But that's what I can say on agenda templates and what needs to be included and what needs not to be included. And like Lisa also rightly said at the beginning, it's very important to say to members that you've got a certain timeline to submit any questions. We normally do it a week prior to the meeting, that they need to submit questions, on any documentation specifically to your annual financial statements, to your budget, so that the trustees or the board of directors got enough time to prepare themselves. We then normally try and deal with those questions prior to the meeting with those members, so that it actually answers their questions before we get to the AGM, and we can go over to business and don't deal with those type of things. The other thing that's very important in a notice is to stipulate in terms of your MRI, the paragraph, what the quorum requirements is. Obviously, with the annual general meeting, your quorum requirements might be different from, it will be different from a special general meeting. Then also, elections of directors. It helps to refer to your MRI paragraphs. what is applicable to that agenda point so that everyone knows what the requirements is in terms of that specific point on the agenda. Yeah, so that's what I can report on agendas, preparation of agendas.
Great, thank you so much, Corin. Liesel, can you give us any guidance maybe from your side that Corin hasn't touched on? Specifically, well, I mean, she has touched on the fixing of, the rules and regulations. Anything else that you can add to that?
No, I think she's pretty much touched on everything that I would also have, or that I've had experience on as well.
Okay, great.
Tita, can I just add something to that, please?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other thing is, it's really, really important for people to understand, when do you call an annual general meeting, for what purposes? When do you call a special general meeting, and when do you call a general meeting? And when do you call an information meeting? I still found, after 22 years in the industry, that people cannot differentiate between those type of meetings, because there's a huge difference in notice periods, in quorums and everything. If you don't determine the name of that meeting, it can have a huge impact on your meeting at that day if you don't send out the notice under the right name. Thank you.
Thanks, Corin. While we're on you, we received a question, I think it was yesterday or the day before, from Joanna Retief. And she's asked two questions together. If you could maybe speak back to this. What she said is, and I'm just going to rephrase in her words, I want to inquire about the best way to register and count members and proxies. That's the first part of the question. She continues to say, we've got almost 600 homeowners in our estate. Telling members at an AGM is not an issue. However, we receive many proxies, more than the people attending. Registration is challenging, especially when a homeowner registers and has been a delegate or delegated by 5+ other homeowners to vote for them. I would like to know if you have a seamless system for registration. Corin, do you have any advice here?
Okay, yeah, that is very challenging. Obviously, with the bigger estates, it is a huge problem. What we normally ask is that all proxy forms must be submitted to the office the day prior to the meeting at cut-off 4 o'clock or at 2 o'clock. So we ask, and we clearly stipulate it's for registration purposes that we request this. We clearly understand that you cannot prevent or not accept the proxy at the meeting. Some of the MRIs used to make provision that a late submission will not be accepted, but there's AJ can maybe just give background on that, why we cannot not accept it anymore, because any person's position can change at any given point of time. So mainly on the proxies, we ask that all proxies must be submitted to the estate office by a certain time and a date prior to the meeting, and clearly stipulate that is for registration purposes. Obviously, what we then do is we will then collect those proxy forms from the estate, or they will forward it as it comes through, but we will collect it all at once. Then we need to verify those proxies to see most of the estate's MRIs or constitution is making provision that only members in good standing will be able to attend the meeting, and that proxy can also just be accepted if the person that's giving the proxy and the person who the proxy is given to is both in good standing. So you need to verify that, number one, to see if the proxy can be accepted. Then number two, what we do is we do a random check. We will physically phone the proxy holders or the people that gave the proxies to see did they give the proxy to the owner. So we will do a random testing. We will do, for instance, if we've got 50 proxies or 100 or 150 proxies, depending on the volume, there will be like 3 or 4 ladies that will phone in a certain period of time, and we will do a percentage check of, say, like 30, a quarter or a third or whatever. We will physically phone them to see that it's valid proxies. On the registration day, obviously all the proxies that was received in advance will already be signed in on the attendance register, where we've got obviously a chairman that might have a lot of proxies. I will already then, prior to that, prepare envelope with all his proxies, with all his counting cards, with all his attendance cards into it, to give it to him so that the process is a bit faster. We've obviously got at registration, we obviously got different points. We clearly mark it that, for instance, urban 1 to urban 100 register in this specific line, the next line, the next line, next line, and then we will have one dedicated point for anyone that will give proxies at the day that didn't hand it in prior to the meeting to the estate or to our offices. We will have a separate point for that so that it doesn't delay the rest of the registration process. What we have found is that we also, for all the estates that we are involved with, we've got attendance cards that are pre-numbered. So in the top right corner, we pre-number it from number 1 to 200, for instance. When an owner register on the attendance register and they are in good standing, the people that are not in good standing, we will clearly just make it not like a lighter gray, so that we know immediately this owner is not in good standing. That specific owner will not get an attendance card and will not get a ballot paper. So the ballot paper and the attendance card will go to the first person, both of them pre-numbered as number 1. Ballot paper number 1, ballot and attendance card number 1. Attendance card, we normally put the estate's logo on it, and we say AGM, and we don't use a year on it, because then you can use it the following year and the year thereafter and the year thereafter. We do it nice and big, we laminate it. And if they want to speak in the meeting, they hold up their card, and everyone knows that they can speak and attend and address the meeting because they're in good standing. So all that pre-numbering, and due to the fact that I'm an accountant and working with all these policies and procedures and the requirements and things like that, that's the way that we do it. And we've never had a problem, in 22 years in the industry, that we were challenged on anything else. So that's on the registration process. Then on the voting process, some of the MOIs do make provision for the appointment of an election committee or scrutiny committee. Now, a lot of the estates, MOIs is very silent on it, but we have found to prevent any technicalities on counting, voting, and things like that, we normally advise the estates and the chairperson that we need to elect or appoint a scrutiny committee. Owners then will be nominated then from the floor. And then obviously when we do any voting, if it's now voting for directors or voting for any MRI changes that's done by ballot and not by a show of hands, we will then get them to observe and to scrutinize all the policies, procedures, and the counting. We've got pre-numbered for the counting. We've normally got pre-numbered, or not normally, we do have pre-numbered Excel spreadsheets that the ballot paper is on the left, or we put in the ballot paper, we count the votes, and it makes it just very easy for someone to go and scrutinize if the counting was done correctly and observe while we're doing it. And then automatically at the end, you've got a formula that counts the votes automatically, and you can establish what the outcome is of each voting on each item that went out on ballot and not by show of hands. So that's what I can report on counting, registration. I don't know if there's anything else I can assist with. Any other questions then?
Thanks, Karen.
I do want to just add there a tip is to afford the guys or the accountants the time to do the counting. Plan your AGM agenda in such a way that you've either got your chairman's feedback or a presentation of sorts, which buys some time while the members are listening to the feedback session to give them to count the votes, because it does take about 20 minutes to half an hour. You kind of need to give them that time just to get through all the counting. All right, so that's a tip that you can keep for yourself. I've got it before I move on to the next question. Somebody, Yondrea, has asked a question: why can you not accept proxies at the meeting if the notice states they must be submitted prior to the meeting? I don't know if Corin may have just incorrectly stated something, but you can still accept proxies at the meeting. We try and win time to get proxies in prior to the meeting so that we can check the information before the meeting. Okay, so it's not that you can't accept the proxies, you can accept the proxies, but it's easier to accept proxies on the day if the majority of them have already been submitted prior to the time. Okay, and why must the person representing a proxy be in good standing? I also think you misunderstood there slightly. It's not that the person representing a proxy, but the proxy or the person being represented needs to be in good standing. Okay. I hope that answers your questions, Yondrea. And then just back to the last questions from Joanna is electronic voting. AJ, can you maybe help us speak to the electronic voting? I know of Globent that's offering this service. I don't know if they've actually introduced it yet, but is electronic voting acceptable already in South Africa?
Gita, yes. But we should be clear on the following. The Companies Act allows you one vote when the vote is on a show of hands, irrespective of the number of proxies that you carry. So in anticipation and in preparation of either an AGM or an SGM, identify those resolutions that will be resolved upon by a voting process and get your electronic voting or ballot papers, whatever, ready for those. For the rest, guide the chairman and say those will be on a show of hands and get them done and dusted and off the table. Also, in respect of logistics and housekeeping at a meeting, again, an unalterable provision is that the chairman is, in terms of the Companies Act, allowed to properly identify either the member or the proxy holder. And just to clarify, the current legal position in terms of Section 58 is that you can table a proxy anytime before the resolution is put to the vote. And secondly, you can hand down a proxy to any person. It can be the dominee, your attorney, the accountant, etc. If that will answer that question.
Yes, thank you very much. Guys, I just want to ask if anybody's got suggestions for electronic voting platforms, please post it in our comments box so that everybody can get the information. I only, unfortunately, at this point in time know about one. So if somebody else knows about others, please, you're welcome to make those suggestions. If you want to obviously make sure whether they are rightfully allowed to, you'll have to check with your legal representatives or service provider. There was a last question from Joanna. I just want to deal with it. Okay, I'd like to ask Sanet and Liesl maybe to give us some suggestions on these points. The question is, how does one encourage attendance when there is a major apathy amongst the young homeowners? We find that the older generation attends the AGM, but the younger generation who want the facilities in the estate make no effort to attend. Sanet, can you maybe give us some suggestions of motivating attendance from the younger members?
Yes, thank you, Gita. Well, I think that most of the young people, or say homeowners, also have small children. So that's always a problem. What do they do with their kids? If they want to attend an AGM, you can't take them with, they will cause havoc. So I would suggest that they would have something to do for, while the parents can attend the meeting, you can have child babysitters or entertainment for the kids or something to do for them so they can, the younger parents can attend these meetings. And then something else that I also think is to, after an AGM or an SGM, is have a community braai, a community function. So just to that the people know, you know, if you attend the AGM or the SGM, afterwards you can have a nice time meet new of the other owners on the estate, and also some of the board members, and I think that will attract younger people to
Great,
attend.
Thanks, Annette. Liesel, do you have any suggestions?
Not really. Like I said, with the last 3 meetings, we've had it virtual. So we've had a lot of young people attending the meeting because they are at home, they're with the children, they don't need babysitters. So yeah, I don't really have anything, but I do agree. Community function, a bra, or just to get together afterwards. We are encouraging that all the time. Yeah, at our estate. So and we do supply babysitters. We've got like a babysitters club. So that definitely does help. I found that with the get-togethers, that I don't see why that wouldn't help. That'll be my problem for next year, because we are going to be having an in-person meeting. So I'm taking lots of notes.
Okay, great. But then on the last question, I'd like for us just to discuss, you know, we've kind of discussed the intensity of the preparation and arranging of the administrative background and that side of the meeting itself. But when it comes to the actual presentation at a meeting, maybe you and Sanet can give us a little bit of advice as to, you know, how do you do your layout setup? Do you bring in bigger screens for presentation purposes? How many screens do you bring? What type of screens? Do you bring a DJ or a sound guy in with microphones? How do you hear people from the floor? I'd like to hear from you so people can get some ideas as to when they're actually planning for AGMs, SGMs, or general meetings for that, even information meetings for that purpose. How much, you know, what do they need to consider to improve on the experience of, you know, the members that are sitting there?
Yes, Gita, I would think that it's always good to have somebody do the sound for you, because some people has got a very soft tone of voice. So sound is very important at a meeting. Then also, once you do your planning for your AGM, SGM, if you were going to present a slideshow, is to make sure that you've got all the correct equipment either outsourced or sourced in, so you can present that, and also that it will be visible for everybody from every angle. Then also the other thing is to always keep in mind the weather. Some AGMs, SGMs are held or hosted outside. And then if you've got a thunderstorm and we're going to host it outside. So you've always got to keep the weather also, keep that in mind. Liesel, you've got something you want to add that I've not skipped?
Well, so we're lucky enough, we have a school very, very close to our estate. It's actually on the estate. So I know the first few AGMs that we did have, I think we had 1 or 2. We actually were hosted in the school. So they have the screens up, and it is very, very important. You've got to have the proper sound equipment available for those games, because I mean, you don't want people to come afterwards and say, oh, but I didn't hear half the meeting. And that's why we were also very, very particular in making sure that our equipment virtually worked as well. We always like clocked in with the property owners during the course of our AGM to say, is everything still clear? Can everybody hear us? Is everything fine? Can you see the presentation? And then also just with the presentation, I mean, we gave the people that were going to be presenting, various of our trustees presented certain things, feedback on what happened during the year and that sort of stuff. Make sure that they get the information to you on time, so you're not scrambling right at the end to try and fit their presentation in as well. But yeah, that's basically it.
Well, great. And just from my side, I think we all need to recognize that an AGM or an SGM or a general meeting, this is an event. And you can actually use this for other reasons as well. With all the members together, you could also use it as an opportunity to give awards for people who volunteer their time during the year. You know, we sometimes forget to recognize the members themselves in the additional work and effort that they put in as the community towards their community. It is very important as well to ensure that, I mean, we've been speaking about the preparation, but we've forgotten about the actual minute taker themselves. So when you guys refer to sound and making sure that everybody's heard and clear through the crowd. I mean, I've arranged meetings. I don't know how, I'm not comparing here, but I mean, my best AGM's attendance was 300 members. We used a school hall. We had to pack out plastic chairs, you know, make sure that all the chairs are neatly packed the day before the meeting. We even used it as a stage to present a lot of the work that was done over the year. You know, I mean, people don't always see what we do, but it's a good opportunity to present that and motivate and kind of show off as to what you've achieved through the year. It's also the opportunity for the estate manager to give that feedback to the members. So that 15 minutes before the meeting, you know, it's good to have a presentation running in the background, just showing photos of what the estate, what the management team have achieved over that 12 months. And, you know, having sound in the middle of the floor for questions, sometimes a challenge. So you may need to split your staff up to have them running around on the floor, you know, maybe have 4 people standing at corners inside on the floor so that they can at least maneuver a microphone between people asking questions, because it's very important for the minute taker to record the property number, the name of the person asking a question, making a suggestion or adding a comment to the meeting, because this all needs to be recorded in the minutes. So there's a tip for you guys. It does take a little bit of logistical planning, but it does work out. So just make sure you've got enough people on the floor to attend to that. And yeah, that's all from my side. I don't see any further questions. I see Johan has pointed out good sound, cordless mic, slideshow events the last year. So he's got a good comment there in the comments box if you haven't seen it. I see Darlene has posted something, working as an office assistant, PA, office manager, basically handling everything. How long is it supposed to take for the AGM minutes to be sent out to the homeowners? Liesel, what's your answer?
Okay, so ours is a week. It must be out within a week. That's it.
To the members or to the board?
Oh, no, to the members. That's to the members. To the board within 3 to 4 days.
Sure, you're tough, eh?
We have tough, we have a very, very tough trustee board, yeah.
Well, you've got a very fast minute taker, so well done. AJ, I don't know if you can guide us here. To my knowledge, your minutes should be done within a week, 7 days from the meeting. I'm a little bit different. I normally take it to a board meeting first for their approval before I submit it to the members. That could take me up to a month because our meetings are sometimes bi-monthly. So AJ, maybe you can give us some guidance here. Does it have to be out a week after the meeting, or what is the actual requirement there?
Gita, if the MOI is silent on it, there's no provision in the Companies Act. So do scrutinize the MOI to see if there's any provision in that regard. And then secondly, quite often on my desk, what are minutes? Some estates just minute, there was a debate and the following was resolved, and then they write down the resolution. So one should differentiate between a recording of the proceedings or a transcript of the proceedings and the minutes. So just keep an eye on that as well. And then when you spoke about tips for the participants, convene the AGM, the annual general meeting, to deal with the statutory stuff. Okay, and those items in the MOI that needs to be dealt with at an AGM. Avoid the point general. Avoid contentious issues because they do hijack your AGM, and your poor person that needs to take the minutes will sit there forever and a day taking down the debates. If there are contentious issues, put them back to back on an SGM on the backside of the AGM. So conduct the AGM, let it deals with its statutory stuff, and then proceed with an SGM, which you can then better manage. At least your AGM is ticked off and it has happened. A further tip, you get 3 kinds of meetings. One that's initiated by the board, your AGM, and when they elect to call an SGM. Then secondly, you've got petition meetings. I call them petition meetings. Companies Act do accommodate if 2 members petition or 25% of the eligible members petition a meeting, your board is bound to convene that meeting, but you need to manage it. And then lastly, there are round robin meetings. I've had experience where we adopted MOIs via round-robin meetings during the COVID. So that's also possible. The only item that cannot be resolved by round-robin, unfortunately, is the election of directors. A further tip, look closely on the wording of your MOI on appointment and election of directors. Just briefly, 5 seats were available for board level. Only 4 nominations were received. During the proceedings, the chairman asked for any nominations from the floor, and there were 2, of which one was then retracted. So we had 5. And the chairperson then asked whether there are any objections to the 5 nominations, which there were none. And then he said, well, we're not going to go to the vote. These are the 5 directors which are now appointed. And subsequently, there was a bit of a legal challenge because the MOI says we need to elect, and we have not elected, but we have appointed. So just be aware of that. Another point, voting. If voting or votes are always challenged when they are close. So good advice is ask the chair to nominate scrutineers, anyone from the floor, to participate with the auditors or whomever is identified to count the votes. And that scrutineer then signs off. It's an independent person that is the result of the votes. It just takes away a subsequent argument that there was some vote rigging or whatever. So we call them a scrutineer. The other challenge, which is on my desk now at the moment, subsequently a member who got notice of an SGM at a late stage now contends that there was a material defect to the notice convening the meeting. So I invite the participants do make a note to have a look at the section 60.3 of the Companies Act. It's got a short list of to do what your notice need to compile or consist of when convening any meeting. So just cast your eye over that, coupled with your MOI. It sets out what are the requirements of a notice when you're convening any meeting of members, whether it's an AGM or an SGM, whatever. Material defects can only be cured if all eligible members vote in favor. And I want to emphasize that it is not legally competent for a majority of the persons there in person and by proxy to vote on a material defect. Unfortunately, all the members that are eligible need to vote on it. So if there's a material defect, rather can it and start the process all over. Material defect is an argument in itself. Again, have a look at section 62.3. Another good example of assistance to those participants, and like you've said, tips, is the late convening of an AGM. Now with COVID, it has happened. And then I get asked the question, do we now approach the tribunal to condone the late holding of the AGM? That we've tried, and the tribunal sent it back, and the tribunal said it's beyond their jurisdiction. They cannot condone it. So they gave a second prize, place it at the late AGM that the members condone it, because they are the affected parties. So if it's late, tell the members why and ask them to vote on it and proceed. Lastly, special resolutions and ordinary resolutions. Often there's confusion that it needs to be 75% of the eligible members, and that is not entirely correct. It's 75% of those members in person and proxy at the meeting itself. We all know to get 75% of your members at any meeting will be a miracle. Okay. And then lastly, sorry, Akita, for housekeeping, signing in proxies, etc., it's also advisable to convene or to set a record date. A record date, one, will get your debtors book in good standing again. And secondly, once the record date has come and passed, you know exactly who are the eligible members, and that also dictates your quorum requirements often in an MOI. That's it. Hold myself available if there's anything else, Gita.
AJ, Liesel, Karen, Sanet, thank you all very much for your time. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to Johan and Anne. They normally help a lot in the back end with all the plans. And thank you all for participating once again in our community conversation. We hope that it was informative and that the tips that we gave you today help you and carry you along to many successful meetings. Please note that if you've got any questions, queries, challenges, you are more than welcome to email your questions and so on through to the CAISA email. You can either use events@caisa.co.za, admin@caisa.co.za, or info@caisa.co.za. We are more than happy to give advice and assist where we can. Please continue to attend our community conversations for more information. We are a team, we are a community, we are community managers together, and we need to all work together to succeed in this industry. So if that's all from everybody, thank you very, very, very much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you nearer to the 10th. I think the date was it the 10th? Anay?
Yes,
The
it's
10th.
the 10th. Yeah.
Right. Enjoy the rest of your week, guys. Thanks,